We have to begin to see employees as humans and not for just what they can do. We have to shift from that transactional leadership to be really more relational and more reflective in the work that we do.
The idea that what they do matters in people's lives, matters to make our world a better place, and that they can see that impact on a regular basis in the work that they do. That they can have access to professional development and growth opportunities to grow as a professional.
Welcome to Nonprofits Now, Leading Today, a new podcast that gives nonprofit leaders a playbook to tackle today's most pressing leadership challenges. Let's jump into the conversation about talent. And I'm curious, I know that it's been really a struggle for a lot of nonprofits to attract the best talent and to keep them. But in this financial environment in which things are really fairly uncertain and turbulent, I'm curious, what do you feel like the state of hiring is today? Jordan, let me start with you.
So I think there are a number of things that are different in the last 5 years since COVID. We have the advent of work from home and remote work. We have a smaller workforce. We all have fewer people and in some cases doing just as many things. We have funders that are still reluctant to give funding to capacity building, and the requirement of doing more outbound recruitment as opposed to inbound recruitment makes the time to invest needed to find the kind of workers that much more dramatic. All of those things, therefore, require us to be more focused in how we are doing the work to acquire talent, because it's going to take more time and energy, and the impact will be that much more significant. So needing to take a step back and saying, what do we need, and figure out what the landscape requires of us so that we can then try and get the resources we want to do the work that needs to get done. Even more critically, because the cost of replacement has never been more expensive.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the calculation. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Keena, do you have things to add about what are you seeing in your environment?
Yeah, I would only add that in thinking about like the work environment, right? And we think about remote work, which a lot of people are having to go back into the office who may have been working remotely over the past few years. But in my research and in other research, it really shows that remote work does impact retention for the workforce. But particularly, we found that remote work increases their intent to stay. And what's also interesting is that a lot of the workforce, it shows that remote work is an important factor, but people still desire opportunities for that in-person collaboration and connection with their leadership and peers. And we know that all organizations cannot be fully remote or, be able to offer these options. But there's one example of an organization here in Tennessee who's really looking to shift to a 4-day work week. And so they've been doing kind of a study of, is the productivity still high, or are staff still getting things done? They've been doing this for several months, and they've sought to implement the 4-day work week. Again, we know not all nonprofits can go to that, but just looking for ways to really increase flexibility. Maybe allow 1 or 2 days to go to work from home to do paperwork or to complete documentation rather than having to come to the office to do that. And I would also add, as we think about the financial uncertainty of these times, at Aim High, Tennessee, we've really been trying to be transparent as possible when changes have been made, especially over the past few months. We try to share what we can of what we know and when we know it with staff, especially if it impacts their work. And I'll just add that one quote that we got or statement that we got from one of our staff that my CEO reminded me of. She stated that, "Thank you so much for updating us for each change that has been made. Trusting that you would update us allowed me to focus on my work and not multitask by checking for updates and news headlines." So we can really, this really shows how effective communication and transparency from leadership is so important when we're navigating times of uncertainty for our workforce.
That's such an important point, that there's so much that you can do through the communication and being open and honest about things, which isn't always the way people think about those things.
Right.
So thank you for that. Jordan, I know one of the pieces of advice I really took away from a conversation we had was the fact that you're very deliberate about how you fill vacant positions. And it's tempting often when somebody leaves, especially, or you have a new grant or something to do, to rush in and get that position hired, because that's why you want to do the work that you're doing. But you urge a really deliberate process. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach each vacancy?
Sure, it's critically important that you look at space and time as your friend, to think about what is not happening during that void that you realize is critically important to the work you need to get done. You also learn during that time the things that aren't getting done that no one notices. You're therefore able to refocus your perspective on the actual outcomes that are critical, and then build a job description with the skills required to achieve those kinds of outcomes. I had the great benefit when I arrived in this role 3 years ago that 3 of our executive level positions were vacant. They were vacant during the time they were searching for a new CEO. And to our board leadership's great credit, they said, we're not going to hire these jobs. We're going to wait for the new CEO to hire them. And that meant for the first 6 months, I was chasing my tail a little bit, doing a bunch of different kinds of things. But that had great benefit because, number one, it meant I got to dig into all of those things and learn about what was going on and what was needed. And then I could take the time to actually recruit the kinds of people I needed and the kinds of skills that I wanted. And I employed a search firm because I knew I didn't have the bandwidth to do it as effectively as it was needed. So I now have an executive team of 6 people, and I am the most tenured of those 6 at 3 years in. But it was a great benefit to me to be able to focus that way. The tendency is for somebody to pull out the old job description, write a job ad based on what the old job description was, when the old job description didn't actually even represent what the person was leaving was actually doing, right? So this space and time narrative is critically important to help us take the business forward.
Absolutely. How dramatically different would you say each job description is from what they had in the first place?
So some more than others. You have a finance job, it has to focus a bunch of stuff on finance. But if you have a program type role, it could focus on a number of different things. In 2 cases, we entirely reframed the jobs. So instead of a CFO, I have what's called a chief business officer, who's also in charge of business development and some of the operational elements of the work, in addition to overseeing a number of the different finance areas. Well, that was a complete reframe of the job because we realized we had a long tenured controller who did a lot of the day-to-day accounting work. But what we lacked was the business development and operational oversight role, where we were having real challenges. So in some cases, it really was revelatory to say, oh, here are some needs over here that just aren't getting done, and these needs kind of are. So in the void, these things are still happening, so I don't have to hire somebody to do those things that are still happening. I want to reallocate those resources to those other things. So in some cases, they look 60, 70, 80% the same. In some cases, only 30, 40%. And instead, pivoting those resources to the mission critical work that will help us sustain long term.
Great. And I bet those jobs are going to keep changing in this environment.
I hope so. I mean, I think that's part of the point that you can say, right? You can reinvent the jobs when there's not a vacancy as well.
Yes, indeed. Keena, your organization expanded really fast, so you had a different situation than what Jordan was facing. How did you approach that idea of trying to fill new jobs when you had to move quickly?
Yeah, as a small nonprofit, we, of course, were so grateful for the opportunity to be able to expand our programs and our reach throughout Tennessee. But having a staff of 5, it's like having a small family. And so even when we have our own families or families that we know of, when you introduce a new baby or a new partner, or just a new person, it really changes the family dynamics in a way. We had staff voice concerns that by hiring so many people, going from 5 to 8 to 14 and so on staff, that it may take away that familial feeling. And so we really tried to move swiftly to meet funding time constraints while also kind of pausing and being reflective, like Jordan mentioned, as we were hiring our staff. So we focused on our organizational culture by being really intentional about building relationships from the onset of hiring. We wanted staff to feel like this is where they belonged from the moment that they, accepted the position and started working with us. And this is not always easy because we are a fully remote agency and we have staff across the state of Tennessee. And so we have had many trials and errors of how we have had to shift our methods of communication. It's easy to send a staff email or a group text to a staff of 5, but that's probably not a great idea for a staff of 35. We had to think through how we communicated major shifts and changes, how we provided opportunities for collaboration and in-person engagement, and allow for flexibility. So I'll give one example. We had a really difficult decision that we had to make. Leadership had to make a few years ago, and we wanted to discuss this with staff in response to some new policies that we had in Tennessee. We were all going to be together for a staff retreat, so we thought, what better time than to share this information while when we're all together. Well, our plan flopped. We didn't prepare them to have this difficult discussion beforehand. They didn't know it was coming up. We didn't consider how we would allow space and time for them to reflect about this decision or to process this information. It just did not go well. So we as leaders had to go back to the drawing board and really consider how we share information now that we have more staff. How do we create opportunities for staff to offer feedback? And so again, being a virtual remote agency, in our virtual meetings, we now shift to breakout rooms to allow staff to reflect on, information that we share, or we share it within, we have program directors share it within their teams and then allow them to come to, leadership or executive leadership for more questions. So we really have to think through how we ensure effective communication across teams, across hierarchical structures. And of course, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but we should be really strategic about how we uphold our organizational culture and our values through times of rapid growth and change.
Absolutely. That's when it's really most critical.
Yeah.
And what a helpful example. Is there anything else you learned from that experience when it went wrong that helps you today?
I mean, we refer back to that that scenario a lot as leaders, and we just recently met with a director just last week, and she's like, sometimes we still have staff that may have questions about maybe some executive orders or things that are coming up today. I'm like, hey, I can just pop in your team meeting and I can spend 10 to 15 minutes where they can just, ask me questions, because we want staff to know that you have access to the CEO, the COO. We're not off limits, and we want to make sure that they're getting the questions answered in a timely manner, because they're doing the work, day to day, and sometimes you need questions answered before another staff meeting.
Oh, that's so helpful. One of the things that often comes up in hiring, and I know I have faced this, is that it's hard to make sure that salaries are competitive, what people would get when they were working at a for-profit. How do you help people understand the difference in the nonprofit workforce, make an offer that is competitive, even though your budgets and pay equity would not be the same if you offered that? Jordan, you want to start on that? What do you pitch to job candidates?
Purpose-driven work. The idea that what they do matters in people's lives, matters to make our world a better place, and that they can see that impact on a regular basis in the work that they do. That they can have access to professional development and growth opportunities to grow as a professional. Even when it means they leave the organization, that's okay with me, because part of the journey is developing our people and enabling them to be successful, even when it means they get to be successful somewhere else, because we can then be the breeding ground where people can learn and grow and develop. This idea that people can try out lots of different things, lots of different roles, lots of different tasks, have flexibility in the work, flexibility in the time. There's a lot of things we can sell as a not-for-profit to say, there's meaning in the work, there's purpose in the work, there's family and community in the work in ways that really matter. And one of the really nice things, your opening question was, what's the challenges of the financial climate that we're dealing with? On the flip side of that, once somebody is working for you, you have a great degree of control over increasing staff engagement, retention, and satisfaction in the work. So once you can get them in the door, and this isn't a secret, we know what does this, right? Keena already spoke about internal communications, which is a critical one. Then you have professional development, my manager cares, and I get recognition for the work that I do. Well, this is not that complicated. All right, so how do we do that? So when you can create opportunities where staff engage with one another and create an environment that they want to work in and be a part of, then your staff also becomes part of the sales force for recruiting others to work in your environment. That is a recipe for trying to get the kinds of people that you want to have in the workforce. Even if we had the money, we couldn't compete. It would be the wrong strategy to compete on salary. Now, you have to be within the ballpark, in the zip code of on the salary side, because salary is still an issue. But it's never the one we can actually compete on. And the for-profit sector, in large part, cannot compete with all of those other things we can provide in a job work environment and purpose-driven work that they can't.
That's such an important point to emphasize what else you offer. So what would you say to a job candidate if you had to make that pitch?
The idea that what you do, you can see on a daily basis making a difference in someone's life. When we get a letter from a person whose parent has just passed, who says, my mom or dad lived longer because they came to the JCC every day and did this or saw this or was part of this. Well, you don't have to guess about whether or not you're making a difference in people's life. When our preschoolers can learn something and you see the growth and development in them and their families over the course of a school year, our staff can see in real time the impact they can have and the difference they can make. And that's a pitch that most of the for-profit world simply can't make.
Yeah, it's pretty irresistible. Keena, how do you lure talent and get away from the idea that it's all about the pay?
We have a number of staff who are either thinking about becoming parents or currently parents. And so as a young organization, we've really tried to implement policies and practices to meet the varied needs of our staff, whether that be through them, going through childbirth, fertility treatments, foster adoption, or even caring for an aging parent.
Oh, that's so interesting to hear about. One of the things I know you focused on, Keena, in your dissertation was how to make sure staff has a sense of belonging. What did the research say? What really makes sure that staff feel that they can be their whole selves, that, there is no fear about talking out, about doing their best work?
So the survey really looked at organizational belonging, right? Do I feel seen, valued, and connected? Psychological safety, again, can I voice dissent and make mistakes? Organizational cultures, do my values align with the mission? Am I included in decisions that impact my work? Do I feel like I'm woven into the fabric of the organization? And then job satisfaction, professional well-being. What I found was that, as one would predict, as our age increases, we have a higher intent to stay in our current role. But there was an interesting finding that professionals seemed to really appreciate their organization's stated policies to promote well-being and self-care, but they did not feel that leadership behaviors and practices aligned with those policies. And so they did not have time to have that self-care or to take time, right? And so it's nice that you have this policy, but I'm not able to access it because of leadership behaviors and policies. The study also highlighted really generational differences. So where younger generations benefit from mentorship, documented career pathways, and professional skill development, the older respondents really were more inclined to desire flexibility, autonomy, and opportunities to share their expertise. And I talked about remote work earlier, and so that flexibility of being able to work from home was very important for work-life balance. But again, the workforce really wants opportunities for connection with their leadership and their peers. My study really showed that we have to begin to see employees as humans and not for just what they can do. We have to shift from that transactional leadership to be really more relational and more reflective in the work that we do. And it doesn't mean that the work stops, right? It just means that our approach to the work shifts. We have to really look at enhancing workplace relationships. And we're all going through difficult times as nonprofits. It's a really uncertain time. And so we have to seek to lead through authenticity and really look at different low-cost, meaningful ways for us to engage employees and help them experience a sense of connection, community, and collaboration that's so important during this time.
Jordan, one of the things you mentioned is the importance of professional development. And I love one of the things you said about the fact that it's okay if we give enough professional development that people go to another organization because we've developed them so well. I think that really does hold a lot of managers back. I've heard people say that to me. Oh, well, I don't want them to leave. And that just seems like such a horrible attitude. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what you do with professional development and how you think about that, make sure your employees have the right growth opportunities.
I've heard that same obstacle mentioned by some of my colleagues, and my response always is, what if you don't invest that time, energy, and money and they stay? What is the workforce you're left with, right? So whether they stay or whether they go, the strategy ought to be the same. Let's develop the best possible workforce we can, and if the outcome is some of them leave, that's okay, because we'll backfill with people who want to work in that kind of environment. Because we know the data says internal communications, professional development, management cares, you have to focus on all three of those things simultaneously. So we adopted both basically the same strategy for all three. It has to be bottom up, not top down, right? The fact that I know what the data says and that I've identified the right strategy does not mean I can simply wave my magic wand and say, this is what shall be, right? It's not a particularly effective mechanism for implementation. We built staff-directed teams, cross-platform, cross-hierarchical, cross-departmental, and then empowered them to do an exercise called stop, start, continue, expand. Figure out what you're doing that works. Start with the positive. These are the things we're going to continue. These are the things we like so much, we're going to expand them. Or we found some things that we ought to stop or some things that we ought to begin. And in each of those modalities, we looked at how do you improve in communication, how do you improve recognition and how people care and interact, and professional development. With professional development, we've strategized a couple of different ways. One, we recognize that we have a workforce of 375 employees, about half of whom are full-time. As an institution that's open 110 hours a week, we never have all the people here at one time, and therefore you have to have asynchronous ways to access professional development opportunities. So we now have a learning management system, a portal where they can access professional development asynchronously whenever they want it. We also have ongoing professional development training here on site at various different intervals, and we've tailored training to individual departments or programs. I've also allocated a fair amount of my own personal time as the CEO to professional development, both because I think it's an important message and optic to send to people that it's so important, I'm going to spend some of my time on it, and because there are things I think I can actually add value to. So for example, I meet with a group of senior directors, not direct reports to me, every month, and they're forbidden to talk about work. Right? We're not going to talk about anything that you actually do, because you all have supervisors that do that. That's not my job. But let's talk about what kind of growth and skill development you'd like to see. So we did a session on decision making. We did a session on goal setting. We did a session on conflict management. And we've done some case study work. Wherever we can find opportunities to meet people where they are and then invest and develop their growth is good for the institution. And the beauty of it is I'm not deciding any of that. I'm hearing from the team and enabling the team to do the work to let us know what they think will matter, and then investing in those kinds of things. And you have to make the link to say, well, is that working? Because when I worked at the national office, I would go into a community and talk about some of their data and results in comparison to other JCCs. And I would say, well, how did you do this really cool thing? And the most common response was, I don't know. Well, if you don't know how you created impact, how will you replicate the results? So you need to be able to draw the dotted lines to say, well, these things that I'm working on related to professional development, communications, engagement are actually impacting the results we actually achieved. And in my first 18 months, we moved our staff engagement score 11 points and scored the highest in the data set of 100 JCCs across North America who participated in the data set. So we know that those things actually worked. But then you have to measure it over time and make sure that you're continuing to trend in a positive direction, because you're always bringing new people in. But I've found great success in the idea of invest in your people and they'll invest in you.
That's such good advice. Is there anything, as you've been doing it, that you've shifted more work on the things where it's in person or you're in touch with people versus the asynchronous? How do you decide what balance is right?
Well, the beauty of it is I don't decide, right?
That's true.
They decide, right? So what we try to do is balance when we offer things. So we can say, all right, well, this one's offered in a morning hour, this one's in an evening hour, this one's offered here, this one's offered there, and then it's the coalition of the willing. One of the interesting pieces of the data is the data actually says that access to professional development is the trigger, right? So even if they don't use the professional development, knowing that it's available to them actually is a trigger for increasing engagement and satisfaction. So they don't even have to use it to have some of the benefit. Now, obviously, they're not going to learn the skills and increase their productivity and work if they don't do it, but we know that it impacts positively just the idea that it's available to them. But I'm not deciding at all, they are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm curious if each of you could offer a bit of advice to a colleague, and they came to you and said, I'm just fed up. I can't find the right talent. I don't know what to do. I'm throwing my hands up. Is there one or two pieces of advice you'd give to them to say, here's what I would do in your situation? Keena, can I start with you?
Adopting that relational, reflective leadership approach can really transform your organization into a place where people want to work and, more importantly, where they want to stay. And so the relationship really begins with your job description, as Jordan was mentioning earlier, how you really show up in the community. It's how you're represented, is how people see you. So how do we communicate who we are from the onset, and then develop and implement policies that show congruency in our stated policies? People want to know that they matter. They want to see themselves in the future of the organization. Turnover is feedback. Employees staying is feedback. Employees staying but causing disruption is feedback. So really build in multiple ways to provide feedback from your staff and reflect on what they share. Consistently and always evaluate what's working well, what isn't, always looking to track and adjust.
Oh, such great advice. Jordan, what would you say?
I think it's a couple of things. If you're struggling to find people, I think it's generally because you're either looking for the wrong job, looking for the wrong person, or you're not pitching the job in the right way. I would actually start with the last and ask existing employees why they stay. This will validate whether or not you're pitching the right kinds of things to prospective employees. And then I would ask a number of other people in the organization to look at what I'm offering as the job and how I'm thinking about it, to make sure that I'm validating that I'm actually looking for the right thing. And then if you validated both of those things, then, and those are not the issue, then the issue is, how are you recruiting? How are you looking for people? And you may need to change the modality in which you do that. So for example, when I was looking for my executive team, I hired a search firm. Even if I had the bandwidth, I didn't have the skills to know how to look. The recruiter said something interesting to me when I was in my second or third search, I don't remember which, that pre-COVID, they put ads out in the world and 70% of the potential applicants came in without them going to look. Post-COVID, it's completely the reversed. Yeah. Only 30% is inbound. That means you have to go out and find candidates that are not looking for you in a much more active way. And if you don't have the skills, expertise, or know-how about how to do that, that means you're now looking for a pool of candidates from 30% of a pool where you previously were looking for 70%. So you're offering the right job and you're making the right pitch. The problem may likely be in you don't have a big enough pool, in which case you need to figure out who can help you do that search in a way that will expand the pool.
That's great. Knowing what you don't know is one of the critical pieces of leadership. Absolutely. This has been such a helpful conversation in so many ways. I know you've helped me think about things I need to take care of in my own role. So I appreciate that. Let's close our conversation today with the standing final question we ask all of our guests. How do you like to recharge? Keena, can you tell us, what do you do to recharge?
Yes, so we are moving into my favorite time of the year, which is the summer, but we're in the spring now. And so I love to be outside. I love to go on a walk to get some fresh air and recharge. Really allows me to, think clearly and kind of shut out all the distractions. I had the opportunity just last week to visit one of our state parks here in Tennessee and be able to hike to one of our beautiful waterfalls. And so that's what brings me joy, and it really allows me to recharge, is being out in nature and spending time with my two sons.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I have an image of the waterfall in my head right now.
Yes.
Jordan, what do you do?
First and most importantly, I remind myself one of the things my executive coach used to say to me, which is, you're not that important. And we all as executives should remember, none of us are that important, right? You can step away. You can be gone for a little while. You can be out of the building, and it's okay. And if it's not, you've done something wrong and not creating the kind of team that can handle things when you're gone. So to enable yourself and remind yourself that you can unplug is an important part of the process. Otherwise, you never will. The two things that I like to do most right now, number one, I have a 4-month-old granddaughter. Every time I can get away and go visit her brings me tremendous joy. And the other, much like Keena, getting out in nature. Where our JCC is located, we're a block away from a lake, and there's a path around the lake. So going and walking the lake and just being around water and around nature and unplugging from an indoor environment to an outdoor environment helps me to recharge as well.
Absolutely. Such good advice. Thank you both for a wonderful conversation. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.